Welcome to the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Trish.
And this is our podcast. We talk about wrestling news and various topics from different promotions, primarily AEW, but also New Japan Pro Wrestling, WWE, and topics from around the wrestling world, the things we find interesting, and we hope you enjoy them as well. We are recording today on October 29th, 2023, and let's just get into it. Our first topic of today is Will Ospreay and his potential upcoming free agency. Trish, I know how much you love this word, so I'm considering calling this segment Bruv Watch 2023.
This is not a good way to start this. Just
you want me to do it again?
No. Just like immediately antagonize me.
Bruv Watch 23.
Okay, right.
So, Will Ospreay has been, his free agency, when is his contract up, Trish? Is it January of 24?
End of January, yeah.
End of January 24.
31st of January is always the same for New Japan, yeah.
Yeah. So Will Ospreay has been someone who, his free agency has sort of been assumed. It's been expected that he's not going to stay with New Japan Pro Wrestling. This being a big problem for a lot of their non-Japanese talent, the strength of the yen and the amount of money that they can pay and their overall business outlook, which we will probably tackle in another episode. But the expectation is that Ospreay is going to leave New Japan and go to either AEW or WWE. Although Impact threw their hat in the ring this week, but you never know. Stranger things have happened in wrestling this year. But a lot of folks have sort of default assumed that Ospreay will end up in AEW for a couple reasons. The first of which being he made it pretty public for a while that he did not want to move out of the UK. He wanted to stay there. And that would be an issue for WWE. They would basically not allow that. And he also talked a lot about his love for New Japan Pro Wrestling. And going to WWE, he obviously wouldn't be able to continue to work with them. That's something he'd be able to do with AEW. So, and Ospreay's been a fixture in AEW since before the first Forbidden Door. He had a giant singles match at All In this year with Chris Jericho, and he got a tattoo about it, which, turned out to be incorrect based on the number of the audience, but that's a story for another time. So this sort of default assumption that he would be going to AEW was shaken this week when Ospreay gave an interview to metro.co.uk on October 23rd, where he indicated that he's open to the idea of stretching himself out a little bit more. And he's had a lot of talks about this with his friends and, as he said, the missus, and that he is now open to the idea of relocating to the United States. This is kind of interesting. He also talked about Seth Rollins as a potential opponent. And the news also came out this week that Ospreay has hired Barry Bloom as his agent. Barry Bloom recently represented the Young Bucks and Hangman Adam Page and Kenny Omega. He's the agent for Chris Jericho. He has, as Dave Meltzer said, he has a lot of folks in AEW that he represents, but he has represented WWE folks too, including, I think, Triple H. So that's what kick us off today on the Will Ospreay. What were your thoughts about this development this week, Trish?
Ospreay is a really interesting character because a lot of people, they just think he's like Kenny Omega, right? So yes, he's a fantastic in-ring wrestler. But is he the draw that Kenny Omega was in 2018? And the answer is no. So for all his successes, you add Ospreay to a card in the US or in the UK, it's not like an instant sellout. So in terms of instant business, he's probably more very much on the kind of the Jay White level or the Hangman level in terms of when they signed with AEW. And for WWE, ironically, thinking about this, he's probably far more similar to AJ Styles, who left New Japan in 2016. I think the interesting things is you look at the potential signing spots for him, and both would mean him working a lot less. I think there's this thing that they think that if he goes to AEW, he's going to probably still wrestle, 70, 80 matches a year. He's going to wrestle New Japan. He's going to wrestle everywhere. He's probably not. You look at the top people in AEW and they wrestle 20 matches a year, 25 matches a year. I think MJF just had his 20th match. Bryan Danielson has wrestled 19. Hangman has wrestled under 20. Kenny has. So the likelihood, and some of that's just a way of TV and the fact that they don't really run house shows. But he's not going to be wrestling as regularly, which will be better for his body in the most part, but he's probably not going to get the same level of exposure as he is as being the top guy outside of these two companies.
Right.
So you really got to make your money now, make as much as you possibly can do. And he is the biggest free agent next year. Absolutely. I don't think, is there anybody left that thinks that MJF isn't signed?
I don't know. I to me, it seems like it's a no-brainer that he's signed. I would be genuinely shocked if he comes out as a free agent in 2024.
It would be like complete mismanagement, wouldn't it? Like
it would be insane malpractice, insane business malpractice.
Yeah, because like you've literally invested more into this guy than anybody else in the company. If you look through the 4 years, all the way through, from the start with the Cody program, all the pillar programs, the Jericho stuff against the Bucks, and then with Jericho himself, the Punk stuff, then bringing him back, and all of obviously this huge title reign. There is no one else in AEW that's had more investment in him. So the idea that they would do that, and nobody does that practically. And I know everyone says, "Oh, John Moxley was working without a contract." He's a slightly different kind of guy.
Yeah,
that's the risk there is different. But I have no belief that they would do this with MJF. So I do believe that Ospreay is the kind of top guy. And the reason why I think WWE is so interested, is they've spoken about the change in their philosophy. And this comes with, I think, the new ownership as well. But their whole thing now is they're not looking for older guys. They're not looking for guys to bring in, bring back in a way that they used to with Hogan, or bring back, and they still use, people like The Rock and John Cena from time to time because they are huge draws.
Yes.
You've only got to look at what we did, last time around with the NXT episode to see how much difference John Cena made to that. But you are looking at kind of replacing guys who are slightly older with guys who are younger and with more upside. They want to be seen as the youthful brand. They literally they are happy to palm people off, to lose people like Edge to AEW, to fill up that kind of thing, to make AEW feel older, and they want to take the younger talent. So ironically, and I compared him to AJ Styles. He could go in there, have one program of AJ, and AJ might be the guy that falls away for him.
Right.
You pay him to like that. Well, you don't need AJ. You've got pretty much very similar, you can market him in similar ways, merchandise him in similar ways, but he's got 10 years. AJ is pretty broken down now, still gets a good reaction, but isn't going to move business as much. So this is the kind of trend that you're going to see more of. So they are going to be so much more aggressive with younger free agents or younger people in AEW who may have hit a ceiling than they are going to be retaining people who are 40 to 50, but not huge business movers. And that's the way their business is progressing. And then, there's the thing about NXT Europe. So I know everyone's kind of said, it's not going to happen. Well, they're running 2 shows in Europe next year.
Yes.
Already.
Yes.
Two PLEs. So Backlash looks like it's going to be in Paris. And then you've got, in August, you've got Bash in Berlin, a week after All In.
Yeah.
Competition, huh? They're normal tactics. So, but if there is an NXT Europe, will it be structured the same way as NXT UK? Are they going to stick everybody in one warehouse and be done with it? I'm not sure. I think the likelihood is that it may be something to do with kind of more branding in that area, or running certain shows in that area, than having some sort of training school or academy. And if you do that, you can have him absolutely as a figurehead. And you could still use him on your other shows. I'm not sure. It's one of them, because he's always said that he wouldn't want to go there, but obviously he's been doing these kind of things with Seth Rollins. He's kind of got that interest there. He is established in AEW. But then also you've got to look at, are they looking at the people that each company has signed or re-signed in the last couple of years? Right. Is he looking at Cody Rhodes and saying, okay, Cody got this fresh load of paint, he got marketed in this way, he now sells more merchandise than anyone else in the company, he's taking on additional workload, huge amount of house shows, but he is a much bigger star now than he was in AEW. Is that important to him? If it is, and it opens up other avenues as well, then, you'd say, okay, it is worth him looking at. And even a Seth Rollins, Seth Rollins is a much bigger star than most people on the AEW roster, because the opportunities are there. He can be in films, he can do this, he can do that. And Rollins is kind of a key guy in that way because it illustrates what a guy like Will Ospreay will probably have as his ceiling, but also as the thing that he would aspire to.
Right.
So he's not going to be booked like a Roman Reigns.
No.
He's not. But then he probably isn't in AEW either. So it's one of them things that they have these set guys and these are their focus guys. Then you find your role within this company. And then with AEW, he's got so much history there. There's so many big events. There's so many connections. And, he could fly back and forth in the Pac routine if he doesn't want to move. And they will pay big money for him.
Yes.
They pay big money for Ellie. They pay big money for Roosh. They pay big money for Jay White. You can argue, have any of these guys been used well since? And that's probably something that, has let AEW down a little bit. Dragon Lee and Cody, particularly the last couple of years of acquisitions, have probably achieved more than how the other guys have been used. So you've got lots of things to look at, but he knows that Tony loves him.
Well, I think one of the things I find fascinating about that when you talk about how AEW views him in comparison to like Jay White or somebody else, I think you could argue that the way that two guys have been presented on AEW TV, Ospreay has been consistently shown as a bigger deal than Jay White. Even when Jay White was the IWGP champion, I feel like Ospreay was presented as, and some of that is a function of the fact that like the first Forbidden Door, I think arguably Ospreay and Orange Cassidy had the match of the night, and some of that's because of Adam Cole's head injury, the fact that it was a 4-way and not a singles match, but. I feel like of anybody who has been brought in, Ospreay has been consistently presented as a top-tier number one main guy in AEW. Is that because that's how Tony views him? Or is that because that's how New Japan views him and that they want to respect what New Japan is doing with their talent? That's the part that's like a great unknown. Because you have a good point. Like, the way that AEW has presented their most recent re-signings and signings versus the way WWE has, there's a gap and it's widening. It's not getting any narrower. And I think we're going to touch on that a little bit more later, but It's a big part of that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. They've presented him stronger than half of their own talent.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at Wembley. Yeah. You get one of the key singles matches on the show. And I do think it's more about how AEW view in the New Japan. If you look at how New Japan have presented him in the last couple of years, they could have used him far stronger since he was the champion in early 2021. And then there was a thing with COVID, the same thing that saw Jay kind of come away from the Japanese events and work predominantly in America for a year. But they didn't go back to him. They went back to Jay White, and Jay White's contract was up far earlier. He was a champion at Dominion in 2022 and going into Forbidden Door. They didn't go back to Ospreay. They didn't go back to him for winning a G1. They didn't put him in the main event. And yes, they did the thing with Kenny Omega, and that was huge because that was their huge kind of global main event as opposed to the Okada Jay White main event in Japan. They were given equal billing in Japan, or Okada slightly higher because of the Inoki thing. But they never looked to Ospreay again as to be the top guy and to be the top drawing guy. They went to Sonada, right? Which everybody hates, but Sonada, LIJ sells tickets, sells merch. Has it worked out? Probably not. But they chose to go to Sonada before they chose to go to Ospreay. So I don't think it's New Japan driven.
Do you think, because I know you had said in terms of Ospreay's drawing power, do you think that's part of why New Japan sort of passed over him? Or do you think it was just for creative reasons?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. They probably thought they weren't going to kind of keep hold of him.
Yeah.
And that makes sense, because, you mentioned it at the very start, that the yen is a real struggle for them at the moment. And that means that trying to offer the amount of money that AEW and WWE are going to offer it's just not going to happen. And when you get somebody like Barry Bloom as an agent, it tells you it's not going to happen.
Right.
Half the guys in AEW are more money than Okada. It's like there is not huge money in New Japan in general. No. And that was the reason why when Kenny was making decisions back in 2018, it was brought up quite a lot. There is a limit here on what I can earn. And that's even less now for a foreign talent because of the change in the currency. So they evidently knew they were never going to keep him. It's difficult. I mean, I wouldn't have done anyway, I don't think. I think they used him well in what they did use him for with the US Championship. It will be good if he can elevate, hopefully they go with Shota at the end of the month. But their thing is transitioning now away from that. So they are transitioning away from trying to create these kind of big global stars to kind of Southeast Asia expansion within that local market, and then bringing their other guys through. So, they've got Red Narita, Yota Tsuji, who will probably be a big guy next year. Naito gets out. I think that's one kind of to watch. Yuri Uemura, you've then got, possibly picking up Katsuko Nakajima, which would make me very happy. I'm not going to lie. But yeah, it makes much more sense for their strategy to do that than to go with Ospreay, who is already over as this guy that has all matches. The thing about Kenny Omega is he's an albatross, right? People will look back in 20 years and realize just how big of a draw he was before he walked into AEW. This is a guy adding 3,000 people to Ring of Honor shows. The biggest Ring of Honor attendance is still him and Cody Rhodes in New Orleans, no matter how much, kind of influence AEW should have and how much more reach they should have. It's still that show. The shows for New Japan in America in 2018 are still their biggest shows. 2018, quarter 3, quarter 4, still New Japan's biggest ever quarters in that part of the year. He's different. He's not the same. So it's maybe unfair to compare Ospreay and expect his drawing power to be on the level of somebody like Kenny Omega, but that does affect his value as well. And maybe his value is driven up because everybody wants him, and because of the image and the perception of being able to pick up guys like that.
Well, it's like sports in a way, right? If you're a free agent in a year with a lot of free agents, your value comes down a little bit. If you're a free agent and you're the only big one out there, you're going to get a bigger payday, and I think that is a little bit of the case for Ospreay. Both AEW and WWE at this point, I think, want to win the perception war that they are the place where people want to go, right? And WWE, I think, has made that much more of a big deal recently than it has been for them in the last, in the Vince McMahon era of the 2010s, I guess would be the way to describe it. That's a big priority for them right now, and I think they would probably view getting Ospreay as like a major coup. Like you said, they want to get younger. Dave talked about this on War on Friday night. WWE believe that they are going to be the young, hot promotion, and AEW is going to hire a bunch of their cast off. That's what WWE sees as the future, which is fascinating for a lot of reasons, but and there's some stuff going on with WWE right now that I think we should touch on. But before we do that, I want to see if we're missing anything else with Ospreay before I get into this topic.
I don't really think so. He's the guy, the free agent with potential next year. So there are other high-name free agents. So, AJ Styles was supposed to be due up in the spring, and then obviously plus injury time. Becky Lynch is probably the biggest name potentially available. Biggest drawing name, has just had a big NXT run in terms of validating her own numbers and her own drawing power. Couldn't have worked out any better for her, honestly. That's probably the biggest name. But in terms of potential and someone that you can shape and that you can promote, and having that kind of freshness from coming from outside, he's by far the biggest name available next year. And it will be interesting. It will tell us a lot about perception of each company from the wrestler perspective as well. Yes.
So the one interesting, I don't want to say quirk in this a little bit, has been some of the discussion about what's going on with WWE right now as how it is impacted by Endeavour, right? So just as a recap for folks who are trying to do the Cliff Notes version, Endeavour is a company that covers a lot of different media. They're started as a talent management agency run by Ari Emanuel, and they've tried to diversify and become essentially a media content company in the last couple of years. They went public in 2001. They bought UFC. They put themselves in tremendous debt to buy UFC, and then was part of the reason why there was discussed that Endeavour was not going to buy WWE because they had a tremendous debt load already. They ended up merging with WWE, and now Endeavour owns 51% of TK TKO, which is the WWE UFC merged public company. Endeavour itself is a publicly owned company. It's publicly traded, but 71% of the voting shares of Endeavour are owned by a company called Silver Lake, which is a private equity firm. And they announced on Thursday, so Endeavour on Wednesday has had some issues with the fact that their stock price has dropped. CAA, which is Endeavour's biggest rival, just had a giant purchase potential. Their stock price went crazy. Ari Emanuel was not happy about this. And Endeavour announced on Wednesday that they were considering strategic alternatives, which is code for possibly going back to being private again. And then Silver Lake, which owns 71% of them, said on Thursday that they straight out said we want to possibly take Endeavour private. This is a big deal in that it would mean that there's a possibility that a private equity firm would own the majority of WWE, and that certainly could have an impact on how the companies run in terms of what they're willing to pay for talent, what they're willing to pay for the expectations for them as a media company. There's a lot to this. And it's still really shaky right now. And I think from a business news perspective, people aren't quite sure where it's going to go. But it's the one thing that could really put a spanner in the works of WWE, domination of the free agent market, and in terms of who they're willing to pay and what, right? So it's kind of something to keep an eye on, and something that's been sort of a little bit under the radar. WrestleNomics has been covering this, but it's one of those things that's coming that I think could be a big issue for WWE in the next year or so.
What I thought was really interesting with this was, when Dave covered this at the weekend, he talked more about kind of the issues in terms of AEW and their potential kind of variables with the TV deal than this particular issue. And yet this, and they say that this won't have a huge effect, but private equity firms like profit, and that tends to mean streamlining. So there is definitely reasons for them to do it. So you are looking at debts that is accruing massive repayments over time. It increases their rate of repayment, and their interest rate is going up yearly. So they need to drive more profit to service that debt. And that's always been the case, but then that affects the share price. And, the share prices have reacted quite well to this, because the idea is that if they do go private, the shares will be sold back to them at a higher price. So if you buy them shares now, you're gonna, at that price, you're gonna receive far more than that if that takes place. Will it affect TKO? TKO are going to stay public, so they do stay public. But it does mean that Endeavour wouldn't be, and their share price wouldn't be as harmed. Well, they wouldn't have a share price, so it wouldn't be as harmed by things like the SmackDown deal, or things like upcoming deals. What's the deal going to be for Raw? Is that going to be disappointing? Looking at the other deals going on as of late, like with NASCAR and other things, probably. What's the deal going to be for UFC going forward with ESPN Plus? What's the deal going to be with Peacock, which is still accumulating additional viewership but not profit? So these deals are all kind of volatile. So there's no guarantee that they're going to get better, and that is all going to serve as the share price. We're seeing other things already that they're going to do to kind of mitigate this. We're seeing, I spoke earlier about the Paris and Berlin events. They look like they're state-sponsored events. There's probably not going to be one big WWE event going forward that's not going to be paid for by the place holding it. Maybe if they run London. But if they run London, they're going to run London at huge pricing to kind of mitigate that. So that's one bit. The other bit is talent. So if they've got a guy that you can bring in, and even through the NXT warehouse, and you have Dolph Ziggler. You get rid of Dolph Ziggler, or you have Grayson Waller at however £100,000. Does the same job, no ratings difference. So that sort of thing is going to become more and more constant, and you are going to see some big name casualties. Absolutely, no doubt. We've just seen boxing in Saudi Arabia with UFC's major casualty in the last few years. So it's not unusual for them to do that. And the UFC model, they make far more profit than WWE, even though they don't make as much money. So that will be kind of the way going forward. Will it mean more volatility? They've just seen a huge period of volatility. They have the takeover, and within a few weeks, as first reported by Wade Keller, Vince McMahon is out.
Yeah.
After how many years? How many decades? And we just treat it like it's just something that's happened because of the thing that happened last summer where people thought he was out. And then he returned, in a nice, very Halloween way, actually, didn't he? Bearing in mind the time. But yeah, he returned straight out of there in the January and threw everything up in arms. Well, now he can't. And it's better for Endeavour and for TKO to have that because you have someone in Triple H who is accountable now. So he's not like the puppet on a string anymore where, he's maybe accountable, but Vince interferes and Vince has responsibility. So who's responsible for these decisions? Who's responsible for these creative decisions and how they are affecting our business? So you are holding him as a business to account. And that doesn't mean he's safe either. That just doesn't believe you now.
That's the part that I found so fascinating about this, right? Because obviously there was a leak about, and we talked about this, I think it was last week or the week before, where Vince McMahon's no longer in charge of creative, and Ari Emanuel was discussing Vince McMahon in sort of negative tones. And the idea is that, the way that it was phrased was, we want to let people do what they were hired to do. So AKA if Triple H is the head of creative, then we are going to let him be the head of creative. We're not going to stop and interrupt him. I assume this is meant for agents and producers and other creative folk backstage. But that also means that there's sort of, nobody protecting Triple H either, right? If he does something or they have a bad downturn in business and all of a sudden it's like, well, he sort of, it's no longer Vince McMahon's company for life like it used to be. And now all of a sudden it's like you're a studio head that, hey, we lost a bunch of money. Now you're going someplace, right? The big question being like, is there, for years, and this is one of the things that I think has impacted Tony Khan and the way people view Tony Khan, right? A lot of these old wrestlers and old promoters who think the only people who can promote and who can book a wrestling show are the people who have booked a wrestling show, right? And that's a very small group of old white dudes. That's not a young, So if that's the case, then is that something that Endeavour is going to stick with, this mindset that there's only a few people that know how to actually book a wrestling show? Or are they would they consider firing somebody like Triple H if he doesn't bring in the product and replace him? I mean, then this is so far hypothetical, it's probably not even worth a discussion. But that was the kind of thing that jumped out to me, was let the creative people do what they were hired to do. But that sort of also suggests, well, we could also fire these creative people if they don't do what they were hired to do, which is produce revenue and bring in money.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's just that sense of accountability that's never been there. You've just had decades of kind of falling metrics. And yes, they were making more money each time, but they were losing huge chunks of the fan base, and they weren't maximizing people's value. They weren't maximizing their talent. They weren't maximizing their stories. So it's one of them. So can they afford to do that now? I think it's twofold, because you look at UFC and Dana White and you think, well, nobody's touched him. And he's been in that business for 2 decades or more. But at the same time, UFC is only getting more successful.
Right. And
even with their changing roster and losing people who've previously drawn big money for them, they still have, they're the most successful they've ever been. Right. The UFC card in Madison Square Garden is going to be an absolute ridiculous gate in a couple of weeks.
Yes.
It's the most ridiculous gate you can think of.
Those prices are insane.
Yeah, and they just lost the main fight off it. Doesn't matter. Right. No John Jones fight, and he's a controversial figure to start with, but it doesn't matter. They're still selling at that because the UFC as a brand is selling, and that's always what WWE wanted. And it doesn't work as well in wrestling, because we all know that it's when people get hot and stories get hot, and you can't just win 50 matches and be hot. Right. Look at Wardlow. He comes back going match after match after match. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. It's harsh.
Poor Wardlow, but nobody cares.
Sorry. Yes,
it's
harsh,
so mean, but nobody cares.
No, nobody cares. And everybody can be Bill Goldberg. It doesn't work like that.
No.
So in that regard, you can't manufacture it in that sense the way you can in UFC. So you've got to be more about presentation, and it's got to be more around creating those sort of things. And some of that is not always in your control. These periods, every wrestling company goes up and down in periods. And we've seen 2 years now of them being able to raise person after person after person to the top. Well, what happens when Roman does lose that belt? Will that change business? Do they have anyone else to come through, any baby faces? Is their top level going to get stagnant because they brought so many people up, in a similar way that AEW have had issues? So there are so many variables in that. So what is their priority? Is their priority, delivering those attendance live average numbers? I don't think that probably even matters to them. What they make from revenue for live makes far more difference to them, but it's perception that does for that. And that's why they sabotage AEW. But in terms of TV ratings and keeping them partners happy and keeping their next deals and keeping increasing that revenue, that's going to be essential to them. So it's probably, it makes it much more interesting, because you think Tony Khan's probably in a similar position at current, because while he's negotiating his TV deal, he needs to make every move possible in order to get as much money as possible. But then once he's kind of done that, they're safe. They don't have the same restrictions.
Right.
We are talking so far into the future, but it's interesting that no one's really kind of looked into it or thought about the kind of possible implications of this, and how many free agents look at this and think, well, that's potential instability. Is that something I want to do?
Right. Well, I think that's one of those things where, as much as I enjoy talking about what's going on in wrestling now, I also like to look into the crystal ball and be like, as you said, wrestling companies go up and down. They have hot periods and they have not hot periods. And if that's going to be the case here, what could be one of the factors that drives a not hot period for WWE, right? What could be a factor that drives a hot period for AEW? And I think, as you said, the role of the network, especially as relates to AEW, and I think even to WWE, is so understated, right? It's so understated with regards to how we talk about creative, with regard to talking about who's being pushed and why, who's like, all of that stuff is impacted by what the network wants. And in a period right now, we're keeping the network as happy as possible because you want the fattest deal possible, because that's going to guarantee the health of your company for the next 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. That, we don't talk about that enough. I don't feel like people discuss it at all. And it's always like, well, it's Tony Khan's fault because of this, and it's Tony Khan's fault because of that. And it is. At the end of the day, the buck stops with him. But he's certainly be impacted by stuff that I think we don't consider on a regular basis.
We've talked about it in group chats and bits and pieces, and everybody gets kind of astounded, But in terms of AEW, what helps with the network sometimes, they love names, that people have known from the past. No matter, if there's, look at Adam Copeland, he comes in, network loves him. He's a name, he has stature, he has the Google trends and whatever else you want. Doesn't draw.
Nope.
They could put someone else in the same spot, they draw exactly the same. Gets far more promotion than anyone else in them 2 weeks as well. But to the network, it's, we have these guys. Yeah, I think they've run a promo May 22, and it was like for AEW, and it had like nobody that AEW had brought through at all, or nobody that had joined the company that wasn't XWE. It was literally, we have Chris Jericho, and we have Sting, and we have John Moxley, and we have Bryan Danielson, and we have CM Punk, and that's because to TV networks they just hear names. It doesn't matter unless, and it takes so much to prove that somebody else can be that. World champions are signed off with the network. They're not, Tony just doesn't make a decision, this is going to, no, you have to have a business case. You have to have the body. Go look at some body transformations. There's some interesting, especially with Max and with Hangman, you have to have things that you don't have to have as a WWE name. And that's all influence. And it's the same in WWE. There's things that the network influence as well. It's famous when Fox asked for CM Punk, it's probably one of the most famous ones out there. Vince had the call to say no, but they can still have that sort of influence. They can influence time. Is it, we talk about women's matches all the time. Well, there's an influence in there.
Right.
Because of the ratings and that sort of thing. So, networks have a huge, huge say in things, and it never really gets acknowledged at all. And presentation. Why do all these shows run around with these huge, massive sets? With all the lighting and the camera work and everything like that. A lot of that is network directed. It's what they want.
Why doesn't AEW run like a fun, awesome, cute venue? Well, like, how do you present yourself for television in a way that makes that logistically possible and doesn't cost you an absolute butt ton of money and is doable within the scope of, getting to the next city in the next couple days? Like, I think there's a lot of logistics to this and a lot of discussion that I think folks, let's just put the belt on Samoa Joe. Well, is the network going to go for that? Like, And I think that's one of those things that I am sort of finding frustrating a little bit in that, when we talked about this, and I said this a few weeks ago, as a fan, I don't need to make this kind of stuff my first priority, but I need to be aware of it and understand why some of the things that I would like to see or some of the things that I would like to have happen aren't necessarily happening or may not be, in the cards. And there may be reasons for that, and I just think it's something that, we should talk about it a little bit more. So I'm glad we talked about it today. So that's pretty much what's going on with WWE. What's your gut telling you, Trish, about Ospreay right now? And I say that knowing that plans change, right? Because my gut's telling me some things, but like I said, I'd hedged my bets.
Do you know, if you'd asked me like a few months ago, I would have thought he was going to AEW straight up. They've got the Callis angle with Fletcher and him putting in there, and that seems like a straight setup for him to come in and immediately turn babyface. Right. That would, to me, that's how that would feel. I'm not so sure now. The attraction of WWE is something to a lot of people, and also, there's so many easier spots for him to just walk into.
Right.
In WWE, and I think maybe that's dry. I don't know. You have to look and think: is his personal relationship with Tony Khan and Chris Jericho and Kenny Omega, to an extent, the driving force behind this? I think I go like 60-40 AEW at the moment.
I'm probably a little bit higher than that but I still feel like you, I'm majority AEW, but I don't think it's a lock. Like I'm maybe at most 75%, and that's probably a little high. I'd probably be about 70. I think it makes all the sense in the world for if there's a default assumption that you're going to place one, it makes a million sense in the world to go out there and be like, hey, I haven't totally ruled out place two, because you want to get the biggest bang for your buck, right? Like this is the smartest business choice that you could possibly make. Like go out there and make sure everybody knows it's not a done deal and you haven't, they should all be coming to you for lots of cash. So I don't think it's totally that. I think, like you said, there's a lot of factors in play there. And I think ultimately it's going to be difficult to, without knowing the people involved, it's always hard to say one way or the other. I think it's more likely than not, but I'm not a total 100% lock. And I think there's going to be some stuff happening in the next couple months that are going to make it. I think the next few months are going to be integral in terms of like how other people are presented, what's AEW doing right now. Like there's a lot going on there that I think is going to be a big factor.
The funny thing is, if you think at this time last year, Jay White was a lock for WWE.
Yeah.
Like an absolute lock. Like in January, like coming up to Christmas, January, everybody thought that's where he was going. Including, a lot of people close to him, a lot of people on WWE. And then it flipped. So everything can change.
It's what makes this stuff fun. All right. So we're going to go on to our next topic, which is going to encompass a series of topics. And this is a thing that I sort of wrestled with a little bit today, and Trish and I talked about it. And ultimately, the way I would like to present this and how we're going to discuss it is mini topics that all sort of revolve around the overarching discussion of narrative incoherence at All Elite Wrestling currently, as of, like I said today, 10/29/23. I think one of the frustrating things that I'm struggling with, and I think, Trish, I could probably speak for you in this, is the way that we currently criticize and talk about AEW in general. It is all or nothing on both sides. It seems like on the one side you have folks that are like, it's absolute garbage, it's the worst thing that's ever happened, it's worse than the worst WWE, it's WCW, it's a nightmare, it's a hellscape, I hate everything about it, they've betrayed my trust, I can't stand this show anymore. And then on the flip side you have people like, everything is amazing, everything is fantastic, why would you hate anything ever? This is the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life, and it's all perfect and beautiful. And as someone who has, and I think, Trish, again, I will speak for you, as two people who have criticisms about the way AEW is being presented right now, but don't necessarily feel like it's WCW garbage, it's kind of difficult to match that middle of the road where you sort of discuss your criticisms reasonably, but don't let them take over. I don't know if you recall last week, Trish, I got very heated about FTR.
It turned out to be the thing everybody noticed first.
I know, right? It's like, she got very upset about FTR. So I want us to try to avoid talking about AEW in catastrophic tones, right?
Oh,
Because
God,
I think,
please.
yeah, we've discussed this. There are bright spots amongst the bad spots, and they are not that far off from fixing some of these things. And I think my frustration comes from seeing how close these things are. But there is narrative incoherence at AEW, and the first thing we can do with kicking that off is discuss last night's collision match between Kenny Omega and MJF, which took place in Uncasville, Connecticut.
I shouldn't laugh. We have a friend in one of our group chats who went on who was basically like, where the hell is Uncasville? What is an Uncasville?
What is Uncasville?
And then had it all explained to him, was like, I felt like I should have made the rant now, and it's like my favorite thing.
But yeah, so Collision's main event was Kenny versus MJF. It was something that got teased on, I think it was Dynamite on not the 25th, but the 18th. Mm-hmm. And then they booked the match this past Dynamite with a promo. So there's a lot of discussion on ye olde internet about this only having a 3-day build. This is, potential huge first-time matchup, enormous possible thing, like pay-per-view caliber match, and it's on a Saturday night in the middle of Halloween season against a World Series game with 3 days build. Right?
And not on TV in Canada.
And not on TV in Canada. Good point. So one of the things I think everybody going into this match expected was that this would be a fuck finish, right? Yeah. I think you and I talked about this. We default assumed fuck finish. Mm-hmm. I think there were a lot of folks that were like, well, this isn't going to end clean. It ended clean. There was a clean pin in this match. It did not seem to set up a second match, right?
Nope,
it seemed like this is a one and done.
I would not be expecting that at all, no.
Right. And it was sort of fascinating to me the way that the announcers, and in this case it's Tony Schiavone, Kevin Kelly, and Nigel McGuinness, throughout the entire episode talked about this match and talked about Kenny Omega. They talked about this match like this was a big goddamn deal. And they talked about Kenny Omega like he was a big goddamn deal. And one of the things I found frustrating about it was that I don't know that AEW does the work or has done the work since, let's say, November of 2022, of presenting Kenny Omega as a big fucking deal, right? I think they have had moments where they have presented Kenny Omega as a big deal or come close to it, but it's certainly nowhere near on the level of the way New Japan has presented Kenny. Even in the Wrestle Kingdom match last year against Will Ospreay, the first of their 2 matches. So I kind of want to talk about this a little bit in terms of narrative incoherence, both the build towards it and the way it was presented and the way it ended, because the match ended with Kenny and MJF with a handshake, which made some people very angry.
Yeah, I'm not understanding that one. I might need some help on understanding why that was the bit that upset people.
Right. Why was this the thing that made you mad?
Okay, yeah.
I think people are still angry about the handshake between MJF and Samoa Joe. And so handshakes in general with MJF are starting to piss people off.
MJF and Samoa Joe is like one where you can look at the creative now and go, okay, so why did you do that if you're then going to go back to it? I understand that one. Right, and he strangled you with some tape. So that one absolutely probably is far more something to talk about than Kenny Omega doing this on a match that is one and done. It is one and done for now, for this title reign at least, and making this song and dance about it. Like, I don't get it. I'm sorry.
No, I thought, first of all, the match itself was spectacular, right? They're both really good wrestlers, and this was a really good wrestling match. It helped that AEW presented it mostly without commercials. It was like 30 full minutes or close to it. It was just a great match. And, it was nice to not have a fuck finish because it's been such a prevalent feature of AEW matches lately is that there's interference and something happens that you got like a clean ending. And, I probably would quibble with the results, but I then fight myself on quibbling with the results because part of me is like, oh, Kenny shouldn't lose to MJF. And then the flip side of me is like, Kenny should lose to MJF because that's what you do want to do. But I just think, this goes back to what you talked about last week when you said this is the point in his reign where somebody should be getting built up. And it's still all about MJF.
It's difficult because, yes, people need to lose clean more. And there's an issue in AEW with that. And there are multiple people that will tell you there's an issue with AEW in that. And the people that seem to not have an issue with losing clean are some of the guys that were there from the start. The Chris Jerichos, the Kenny Omegas.
Yep. The John Moxleys.
The John Moxley, Moxley doesn't lose that often, but he'll lose. But there's definitely a differentiation, and that has been an issue, and especially since, the roster kind of changed its makeup in more recent years. The issue is not with him losing, and it's not with him losing clean. And I am so tired of reading the same 10 things, because I feel like we're making straw men. So there are issues with what they did here, and there are things that were great with what they did here.
Yes.
They made Omega sound like the guy that he is. This is the best big match wrestler in the world, ever, probably. Yep. There is no one else like him. No. Like, people talk about Okada, they talk about Danielson. They do not have the same level of match every time that Kenny Omega does.
No.
He has a special match every time. Forbidden Door, we still... you have literally his match of Ospreay, even before the injury. Danielson and Okada couldn't live with that.
No.
They couldn't live with it.
Incredible to see live, to be like, this is dead. They have killed this crowd dead. There's nothing they can do. They're trying so hard and they couldn't do anything. And
it doesn't really matter in a way what AEW does with him, because he can go somewhere and do that anywhere and it's back. He has that aura.
Yes.
He's special. And I really wish people would see how special he is. I make arguments. He's the biggest draw this company has ever had. You go back, you look at the pay-per-views, you look at the ratings and his programs and the big programs that he's had, you look at the ticket sales, even this year, I still think he's the biggest draw this year. The cage match with John Moxley, the six-man at the start of the year, the Vikingo match, which is still, to me, the most impressive rating. Because if you look at that ratings pattern and that rating number against NBA, nobody with that sort of competition has been able to achieve that.
No, he blew it out of the water. Blew it out of the water.
With practically, and that was after a period of not actually being able to speak on TV for 3 months.
Yep.
So this guy is special. And that's not taking anything away from Max or anybody else. No. You know what you're going to get with Kenny Omega, and I just wish that they would promote it as such.
Yeah.
On a regular basis, and that's the thing. So you look at New Japan, right? He goes to New Japan, he does the Will Ospreay match. That had a short build. They built anticipation for it months before. He did the announcement straight after Full Gear.
Yep.
The next morning, they ran that one on the next day in Japan. They ran that one straight away there. There was nothing else for them for like 2 months. So they built that anticipation. And then in the run-up, he did press after press after press in English in Japan. Yep. And then they did the press conference. They did 2 massive set promos right before, and then New Japan hammered it. They had adverts in YouTube. They had everything everywhere. They did the support videos. They ran things, in the build-up on the road to. They did everything they could to promote it. And that's an example of one of the very rare things that happens, where the first match drove more interest than the second one. So, if you think about Kenny in particular, you've got matches like the Okada series. Each match gains more interest. Or his matches with John Moxley. So you have the one at Full Gear, then you have the one at Winter is Coming, which did a huge rating. Huge increase on the previous 4 weeks. And then you have the pay-per-view with the Exploding Barbed Wire Death match at Revolution, which does a huge increase on the previous year. So you see these kind of incremental increases because the interest drives up because of the previous matches. We didn't see that at Forbidden Door. We didn't see any press at all. Kenny did one interview with TSN earlier in the week about the Canadian tour. Sounded like a New Japan wrestler. She said, we didn't see any press, we didn't see any videos. We didn't even have him on Dynamite that week because they had long been told long before they were not going to be on that episode because the return of CM Punk was viewed as a bigger thing. So they didn't maximize that. And he didn't main event, even though there was lots of people in that company. I think Danielson's spoken about it recently, so we can talk about it. He spoke about he never wanted to follow Kenny Omega ever again.
No.
And this has been, it's been consistent of him being kind of under-promoted, and his focus has been very inconsistent since Forbidden Door. They did the blood and guts thing, and then he's kind of been in and out and in and out. And you can tell that, maybe he needs more reps. His mic work isn't as confident as it used to be. He made note of it. He made note of how little he gets to talk on TV in the promo on Wednesday. So he maybe needs more belief in him sometimes as well, even at his age and his style and what he can achieve. But it just, if you promoted this the way that you promoted Edge's debut,
ugh,
yeah, Like, so you've got to make it mean something. He's a special attraction now. He's not wrestling every week.
No.
He's not going to. His body isn't going to wrestle every week.
No.
When he came back in November, he was like, I'm wrestling with the Bucks. This is what I'm doing. My body, and maybe there was other things involved in that too. Maybe that's not a straightforward decision, but it was, this is what I'm doing. And this is what my body can achieve. He is never going to be that guy that wrestles, the schedule Ospreay has wrestled this year. It's done. It's not going to happen. But he's a special attraction, and he's still one of the biggest attractions in your company. Treat him like that. Promote him like that. Make this important. You did this in the middle of a feud, okay?
With 7 other flipping people, which we'll get to in narrative incoherence. We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah, you did this in the middle of a feud. The belt wasn't even available. You did a really stupid angle early in the show on that too, when you made Max look like a WWE babyface. I'm sorry. That was just... That made him look an idiot. I have no idea why they did that. And then you have it, so he gives him that clean loss. He gives him that kind of passing of the torch. And it's barely seen, and it's not built up in that way where they make it a big deal. This should be screwing. They should have been discussing this on every radio station. Tony Khan should be out doing his little media run that he does. Max should have been out. Kenny should have been out, other than doing kind of one thing in Sports Illustrated, which had some really weird paragraphs.
That was a weird article, Trish. That was a weird article.
Just straight underneath the first comment was just like, he's probably losing because, MJF's already got a title opponent at the next pay-per-view. And you're like, what? So what are we doing here? That was really strange. But you've got to promote Kenny on that level. You are paying him an enormous amount of money. Yep. You are paying the elite an enormous amount of money. And the problems with Kenny extends to all 4 of them guys. Probably less so to him, but definitely does. You didn't want them in WWE. You knew what damage they would do to you, WWE, particularly Omega. Yeah?
Yes.
It's not just, maybe you're paying them to keep them quiet as well, which is one of the things when everyone talks about, we want them to do radio on press. I'm like, they don't want them to talk. But you are paying them this amount of money to keep them from WWE because you know what impact they could have there and how they could be presented. Why don't present him like that?
It's just
it drives me crazy.
No, it's another example of AEW missing an easy shot, right?
Yeah.
This was an easy shot. And I do think the 3 days build argument is in some quarters a touch overblown. That said, because I think those of us that were paying attention, and the second they said, MJF will be at this collision, Kenny Omega will be at this collision, we kind of were like, okay, they're going to do Kenny versus MJF, right? Like, it was, at the same time, I am kind of like you. I don't understand why you have someone who is a consistent ratings and ticket mover for you. Somebody who moves numbers in a way that very few other people on your roster do. And yet you don't want to present or promote him in that way as a big, big fucking deal. And it's sort of baffled me. I kind of understood it when CM Punk was there in terms of like, okay, well, you've made your choice and this is the horse you decided to ride on. That horse drowned itself. My metaphor has become ever more tortured when I try to discuss this topic. That horse drowned itself. So why are we not now pivoting and putting Kenny back in that level of Danielson? Like, Danielson can't breathe without breaking a bone, and yet every time he comes back and he's presented as a big goddamn deal. Moxley is presented as a big goddamn deal. Like, where is that for Kenny? And they did it last night, right? But it's like out of sight, out of mind. When Kenny's not around, he's not talked about like a big deal the way that some of the other guys are. And I find that to be one of those things where it's like, if you're not going to open up your top of the card scene to other people, which you don't seem to want to do, then why can't you present this guy as a top of the card guy? Sure. Like, I don't know. It's the narrative incoherence of the MJF feud with Kenny was one of my frustrations with it. Even though, like I said, I do feel that some of the criticism was a bit, like I talked about this last week. Whenever there's any kind of criticism with MJF, there's a nastiness to it that I think seems very personal in some ways, right? Like, people have just decided that this guy is the worst guy, like the Hulk Hogan references, and it just doesn't seem earned for someone who is not, I think there's legitimate criticisms right now. And I think the fact that there's like a million freaking feuds going on, like the only thing that seems to be happening in this company is circulate around MJF. And I want to talk about this a little bit right now because I think it's kind of important. And then I want to use FTR as an example. That's sort of what I'm talking about. Maybe I'll try to stay calm this week.
Okay.
But when we talk about what's going on with MJF, right? MJF is now was feuding with Kenny.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be done. He is, although I still think, and you called this, I still think there's a shot that Kenny and the Bucks back MJF up against Jay and the Bullet Club gang.
I'm getting to the point where I put money on it now, yeah.
Yeah. You were the one who said this, and I think it's much more likely. So we had that feud with Kenny. You've got a feud with Jay White and the Bang Bang Gang with a sub-feud with Juice Robinson. Wardlow is apparently coming for MJF. Samoa Joe keeps showing up and talking to MJF. The Kingdom and Roderick Strong seem to want to be involved with MJF. The Acclaimed are involved with MJF. Mm-hmm. Who am I forgetting here? Is that everybody?
Hobbs,
so this is
Hobbs is not watching. Yeah.
Hobbs is watching, so that's 8. That's 8 separate people involved in feuds with MJF right now.
Sure.
What else is going on in AEW? Okay, and I don't want to overstate this because I think there are some. Right now, you've got Orange Cassidy, the international title. He's feuding with various eccentrical members of the BCC. Mm-hmm. That keeps getting messed up due to injury, but that's an ongoing storyline that we're seeing for the most part on a weekly basis. Fair. We've got Christian Cage and the TNT title, which is encompassing Nick Wayne, Luchasaurus, Darby Allin, Sting, Cope, and now Ric Flair, which we'll get into that in a minute. Mm. We've got Sky Blue's imminent turn to the dark side.
You've done that. You did that on purpose.
I never would. We've got Chris Statlander's dealing with that and with Willow Nightingale. We've got Tony Storm, Timeless Tony, seems to be coming after Sheeta. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot going on with the Outcasts. Saraya hasn't been seen since she dropped the belts. Ruby had a match, Ruby had a match, and that's it. We had Santana and Ortiz. They had their blow-off match on Rampage Friday night. Ortiz seems to be getting recruited by Sanjay Dutt, which is a weird grouping. We have Eddie feuding with Jay Lethal. That's going on. And then we have whatever the flip is going on with FTR, which was on Collision last night. But we've got Miro and CJ Perry, right? That's not, it sounds like a lot, but I don't feel like it is a lot. And not any of it's really that interesting. And not any of it is really being something that we're looking at week to week. It's just stuff that is like, thrown out there once in a while. And let me put it this way, right? So Collision last night, we had a spectacular promo from Claudio about his upcoming match on Wednesday with Orange Cassidy. Mm-hmm. Spectacular promo. But all I kept thinking about is here's another feud where the angles are being driven by the heel. The heel is doing the talking. The heel is the one being presented in given promo time. And that's where the focus is. Like, there's just, like I said, narrative incoherence. Like,
do you know what's funny? Is you listed all them programs, and you didn't list Swerve Hangman, and you didn't list the Jericho, Kenny, Callis family thing. And it's more, it illustrates how nothing feels important, right? So, if you think about it, the biggest periods in AEW history of success. So we'll do this chronologically. So you've got January to March 2023. You had multiple hot programs. So you had Cody and MJF. You had Kenny Hangman's tag run with the things with the Bucks, and you had Jon Moxley, Chris Jericho.
Yes. 2020. Yes.
Yeah, in 2020, and then summer of 2021, you had Hangman and Kenny Omega. You had Chris Jericho and MJF.
Yep.
They were the two big driving stories. And then also you had the Lucha Brothers, or they were mixing with Death Triangle and Eddie Kingston with the Bucks.
Yes.
And a bit of Jurassic Express as well. So you have multiple hot programs there. And then going into spring of 2022, you had CM Punk, MJF, you had Bryan Danielson and Jon Moxley, and you had Hangman, who still had, believe it or not, because most people don't, I guess, supporting him, whatever he was doing as that champion. So you always had multiple things going on that people were invested in. And things felt important. And I think these are the two big things that create all this, because the focus is on Max because he's the only thing being focused on this TV show.
Yes.
And if you like what Max is doing, I said he's like Marmite, right? If you like it, if you're enjoying that story, then you're going to be pretty happy with everything because everything is around him, right? But if you don't like it, what else is there for you to sink your teeth into? You need other things for you to sink your teeth into. And that's how AEW has always worked. Nobody has ever liked everything they've done at any time.
Never.
But there's always been enough that if you don't like this, well, I have this to focus on. Or I don't like this, but I've got that to focus on. And when you lose that, it becomes more difficult because then you've literally got a 50-50 split of, do I like this thing or not? And if the answer is no, then you start to feel that disconnect. And that's what's happening here. So you take out the kind of TNA mecha style, we love everything, everything's awesome people, and you take out the we hate everything people, you have got a lot of people in the middle that have that disconnect. And that's what you're seeing in the metrics. Because unless you're really invested in something, you aren't buying a ticket. Maybe you are at $10 or whatever, but in general, you need something sometimes that you're invested in to drive you to buy that ticket, especially if WWE is in the same town. You're making a choice there, right? So that might be the difference between buying that ticket or not. And you can throw things on there. You can put, we've got a card this week, or we can do that, or Mystico, we can do. But that's a short-term solution. That doesn't fix anything long-term.
No.
The other, the thing with Max is, and with the Kenny thing, is the biggest thing is, did they give it the level of importance that should have by doing that match the way they did? And that's probably the biggest issue. So you gave him that clean loss from Kenny Omega. Right. Does it matter? Does it mean anything? Could it have meant more? And that's the difference. It's the same. You gave, Takeshita that clean loss. He then doesn't wrestle a match on TV until this week, and you put him on Rampage and you don't promote it.
Right.
That is not making the most out of these things. You have to maximize that value, and you need to maximize these occasions because they're the things that drive these other guys like MJF, like Takeshita, and make them stronger as well. It elevates everybody. But if you don't give anything any importance, or you don't give anything else any time, you'll never get that. You can never have a one-man team. Max is kind of very Cena-like to me at the moment, not just in his moveset or the way he kind of is, but his kind of lack of adversity. He doesn't have any adversity. And I do feel kind of sorry for Jay White, right? Because Jay White looks minuscule in comparison to Kenny Omega. And he's had this his whole career, poor guy. Kenny leaves New Japan, he has to step into that kind of role. So he's been in Kenny Omega's shadow for all that period of time. But then you do this stuff with Max, and there's all these other things going on. The stuff with Adam Cole is still going on. I think that's coming back. I will put money on it that before this reign is over, there's something to do with Cole.
I would not be surprised.
Yeah, I'm not putting, people say, oh, we're going to have a nice, fresh or exciting champion. I don't see it. I do think it's going to be someone established. I really, really do. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's Adam Cole. But the idea is that you have that going on. That's superseding you already. You're doing promos, and Max is very strong in terms of, because he's still doing the heel thing, maybe he goes in too strong, or maybe the way the babyface would normally react isn't there, so it's harder to work off. Then you've got this stuff with Juice Robinson. So you're already taking heat away from Jay White. Right. Because you're putting the heat onto Juice Robinson. And then, obviously, with that sort of angle. Then you've got the issues of him not really defeating anybody clean, practically. You take 15 minutes to put away Al Fox, okay, very okay. You don't put Hangman away clean. You struggle with Penta. That's not going to make you look like a threat. So he's not looking like, I don't know if this is elevating him. And then, God, you put him behind Kenny Omega, and people are like, I'd like to see that rematch more than they're going to want to see Jay White at the pay-per-view. It's not a great place for him to be.
One of the things I think that is benefiting Jay White, and I don't disagree with you on what you've said, I think it's a good point, but I think he is getting as much or more TV time than almost anybody right now. He is all over both shows. Bullet Club Gold is all over both shows. And I do think that I agree with you that he has definitely taken a back seat in this feud. It doesn't look like it's clear he's not winning. Yep. He's got the next pay-per-view match, but we're fighting 7 other people and yada, yada, yada. But at the end of the day, there is something to be said for consistent television time. Absolutely. And that I don't think is a bad thing necessarily here. But, even last night when they were like, oh, we've been advertising When has that ever happened? It's never happened that they've advertised a pay-per-view main event and then changed the belts on a TV match before it. Like it short of injury or catastrophic plan changing, that doesn't happen. So when you say to me, oh, well, we could be Kenny Omega versus Jay White at Full Gear. Well, I know it's not. Like, I don't know. Like, that's the kind of stuff sometimes where I'm just like,
but sometimes they add and make it triple threats. We've seen it with Bryan Danielson and Roman Reigns doing an Edge, as it was at the time, and then why does it all include Bryan Danielson? Bryan Danielson and Randy Orton and Batista back in the day. But the thing about doing that is that kind of points out that something in that original match isn't doing what you wanted to do. And that's kind of the issue as well with running the Kenny thing. It's like, oh, this program isn't doing enough, let's add this. It's perception. And I know everyone's, oh, he's finally gets over. Yes, he's getting fantastic amounts of time. He's getting time that other guys would only dream of. And, there's an element of not just that, like the consistency is, but again, that's heel driven as well. He gets more time, but Max gets plenty. I guess the thing is like he works Collision and he works Dynamite. And there are very, very few people doing that even now. We're still not seeing that transition to stories moving across two programs. We're seeing people run different programs, or we're seeing culminating matches. So in the case of, Christian and Bryan Danielson, or, this current Kenny match that we saw last night, we're seeing culminating matches put on Collision, but we're not seeing these stories told across both.
No.
And that's not changing.
No, it doesn't seem like it is. Because, Collision last night, I know 2 weeks ago I came in hot because Collision angered me. And I enjoyed Collision last night for the most part, but I was still struck by how thin that show is in terms of what happens on it, right? In terms of the people, and I don't want to become one of those people that's like, well, this doesn't appeal to me. This didn't cater to me specifically, so therefore it was bad, right? Of the people who are consistently on Collision, none of them are my, like, oh, I will drop everything to watch these guys, right? That's just how it works. That said, I still like some of these people. Miro is slowly but surely making a comeback in my I haven't thrown him out with the bathwater yet type situation. But that said, like, Collision is really bereft of any angles happening. And some of the angles we're seeing are disappearing, and I think that's the next thing I want to talk about, which is going back to my thing that is not going to get me angry this week, which is FTR and the tag belt reign that they've had. And we talked about this a little bit last week, and I kind of went back through today because I wanted to look at when exactly did FTR win the titles? How many defenses have they had? Against whomst? And for how long? And it was kind of shocking to me, because I think I had it in my brain that, well, they've had a lot better matches, right? Or they've had some better feuds than what I thought. And the reality is it's pretty thin, right? So FTR lost the IWGP, Ring of Honor, and AAA tag belts pretty quickly in the fall, early winter of 22-23, right? I think it was October, December, and January. Okay, they became the AEW tag belts. They didn't have a single match between the beginning of January and Wrestle Kingdom and when they won the tag belts from the Guns on April 6th, 23. Okay, their first title defense was against the Guns at a house show on May 12th. Their second title defense was at Double or Nothing, where they defeated Jay Lethal and Jeff Jarrett. And that was Jay Lethal and Jeff Jarrett's second consecutive pay-per-view tag belt champs, because they fought the Guns at... was it the Guns or the Acclaimed? They were the opponents for Revolution, right? So then we had the Collision debut, where CMFTR defeated Jay White, Juice Robinson, and Samoa Joe. The following week, we had Bullet Club Gold defeating CMFTR and Ricky Starks. Then we had Bullet Club Gold defeating FTR in a 28-minute eliminator match. That was on July 8th. That was like a big match. Wasn't for the titles, but it was considered a really good match. And then the following week, they did that 2 out of 3 falls tag titles match that was, I think Dave gave it 5 stars. It was on July 15th, and it was 58 minutes. That was their third title defense, was from April to July. They had 3 title defenses. And then the next week, they had their 4th one. They beat Better Than You, Baby, which was Collision's second highest rating after its debut, which is still Collision's second highest rating after its debut. And then the week after that, on August 5th, they beat Brian Cage and Big Bill for the tag titles. Then House of Black beat CMFTR for the trios titles, which I had wiped that from my memory. And then FTR beat the Young Bucks for the tag titles at All In on August 27th. Then Bullet Club Gold beat FTR and the Young Bucks at All Out. FTR beat the Iron Savages on September 16th for the tag titles in 3.5 minutes. FTR beat the Workhorsemen for the tag titles on September 23rd in 4.5 minutes. And then FTR beat Aussie Open for the tag titles at Wrestle Dream. And that was their last successful defense. They lost the following week to Ricky Starks and Big Bill. And then they had a no contest match with Bad Thad and Darian Brown. And that was like a minute. Okay, so this was their tag defenses. There's really no storyline around any of those tag defenses. Clearly they were, other than the Bullet Club Gold, which I think you could argue is a pretty strong storyline to kick off Collision. It wasn't for me. I didn't really want to look at CM Punk at that point, but I know a lot of people loved it and it got a lot of praise, okay? Yeah. So fine. Then they went into this Young Bucks program, okay? They beat the Young Bucks at All In. They teamed up with them at All Out. And then at Wrestle Dream, the Young Bucks won a title shot for the tag titles. This was a whole big thing. They had a 4-way. They beat all these guys. And then the next week, October 7th, FTR lose the tag belts to Ricky Starks and Big Bill, okay? Fightful reported that night that the Bucks versus FTR is not happening anymore. Wrestling Observer Radio said, well, Cash is hurt. There was some reports on the Figure 4 board that Cash was hurt and had some legal problems possibly that might be impacting him. This was, sort of rumors that were being shared. And then on October 11th, we were told from Fightful, we were told Cash Wheeler's nursing injured ribs, but we're not told if he'll miss any time. And then all of a sudden on October 12th, Wrestling Observer Radio and Pro Wrestling Insider both say that Dax and Cash did not lose the tag titles because of injury. It was a creative decision to put Ricky Starks and Big Bill over. Collision on October 14th, we talked about this. FTR were in the ring giving promos and big rigs like nothing was wrong. Wrestling Observer Radio on the 15th of October said that they were going to do a rematch for the tag titles where FTR was going to win them back from Starks and Bill on the 28th episode of Collision, which was last night. That didn't happen. And then Dave reported in the Observer on Friday that the match with the Young Bucks is unlikely. And I will say that during this entire period, there's been no mention of the Young Bucks being tag titles contenders. There's been no discussion of this. The Young Bucks disappeared off television until the Rampage of last week and then the following match with the Hardys for the Ring of Honor tag titles, right? And this whole storyline has just disappeared. Again, I'm circling back to narrative incoherence. What the fuck is going on? What the fuck is going on?
How much trouble can I get in?
Get in as much trouble as you want. Like, what the fuck is going on with this? Yeah, and I'm not trying to kill you all with dates, but I want you to get a sense of where we're at with this.
Let's start with the point. I think, as a whole, you would say it was a disappointing tag reign.
Yeah.
You would say that there's no progression of the character.
Nope.
There hasn't been. The only character what they did was getting kind of smoked by Matt Jackson in one interview before. It was the most interesting thing that happened to them in their entire tag run. Yeah, so it was a very strange one. Yeah, the belts were only Acclaimed at the start of the year, and then were taken off them to Guns and Transition, which cooled the Acclaimed off. There is no doubt on that. They went from the top merch sellers in the company to kind of bit part players. And if you look at their ratings and their quarters and their episodes they're on, it's nowhere near. They were driving ratings from July through February this year, from July last year to February this year. That's not happening anymore. So we sacrificed them in a way for this. That's the only way to look at it, and it's the way most people look at it. So you put them on them, they do nothing practically till Collision starts. They do the thing with Bullet Club Gold, which is really just driven by the belts and the matches. It's not a character-changing program. It doesn't change anybody's character, in fact. No. And you think about it, that program really kind of runs all the way through the summer until you get to All Out with the 8-man. And they run that with, and FTR Bucks was a late thing. We all know, Bucks and Hangman were going to face the Righteous, and the stuff that they're doing with Ring of Honor was kind of probably going to kick in a little bit earlier if they were going to do it or not. But you do that, and you do the setup by doing We're Not Working Together and stuff, and it's hot. The Bucks were the hottest they've been in donkeys at All Out. Crowd were going out to it. And then all of a sudden this all changes. And we're not doing it at Full Gear. In the Bucks home market. Or we're not doing it at Rancho, because I know there was discussions on both. So it seems quite a weird thing. The thing about title reigns as well is, you can say, oh, we had 2 great matches in their title reign. Well, that doesn't really make a title reign. So who did you make? Who did you make stronger? Who did you lift up? Because that's kind of your role as champions. How did you represent that division?
That's why I wanted to go back and look at those matches, because I thought to myself, geez, like they fought the Workhorsemen, they fought the Iron Savages, and again, I'm like, that's 3.5 minutes, 4.5 minutes match.
Doesn't benefit anybody.
You took a lot of heat in those matches, right? Like, you made it look like those guys were beating you up, but like, how did that help either of those teams? Like that whole sequence, and like, again, FTR are a good tag team. I don't want to understate that. They're a good tag team. They're good wrestlers in the ring. They're very good. You put them in a tag match with another really good tag team, and you will have an absolutely pants-wettingly good tag match. Non-negotiable. And I certainly don't want to understate that. But the creativity and the level of like storytelling and interest in characters, nothing happens with them. And so like, I'm just so frustrated by this, because at the very least, like, the most interesting they were, like you said, was when Matt Jackson was reading them to filth.
Yeah, and he was, Dax was trying to put his tongue back in his mouth. Look, you have this situation then where, there's a funny thing where people say, like, the Bucks only work with their friends. Well, look at the list of people that FTR have worked with in this tag ring.
Right.
It's surprisingly small. They've worked, how many people this year? 29 if you include the no contest, which was people who don't work for AEW, right? The Bucks have worked 43? 43. So, which is kind of a funny stat. But it's like this reign has not included too much interesting. It's not included too many people or any split tag teams, like singles guys wrestling together. You've had no talent from elsewhere. There's been nothing really driving that interest. You have 3 big matches and stuff. I still think they should have lost to Cole and MJF. Yeah, they weren't hot then. That was the time to pull that trigger. You lose them belts when you do to Starks and Big Bill in front of 300,000 people because it's going up against a major WWE pay-per-view. Nobody watched. Nobody saw it. If you're going to end at the end of a title reign, and this is a thing for Max to, I want to be careful of that as well. The end of the title reign should be one of your key moments. You should be elevating someone up. It should be important. Again, it's the same things, right? It should be important. That was not important. Nobody cared. And you spoil it anyway when you walked out and did your promo with your, chewing a bulldog, chewing a wasp face. Like, we're definitely going to lose. You told everybody the game.
But that's what baffles me about this, Trish, is that if the whole point is that, well, we have to put over Ricky Starks and Big Bill, we want to make Ricky Starks and Big Bill look good, then what was a boo-boo face for? If this was your idea and this was what you wanted to do, then why did you look like someone just told you your dog had died? Like, let's talk about last night, right? Dax had a match with Ricky Starks. Yeah. Heatless. Absolutely heatless. Yeah. They popped for the entrances. They popped for the finish. Cash was doing everything he possibly could to get that crowd to give a shit. And that crowd was hot for Jay White versus AR Fox and for Kenny versus MJF. That was not a question of the crowd being dead. Like, there's no interest in that program. Like, what are you going to do with Ricky Starks? And then the best part is after that whole thing happens, you have House of Black are watching the Ricky Starks Dax match. Why? Unclear. You have House of Black attacking the ring afterwards, and then LFI coming out, right? This is the first we've seen of Roosh in months.
Yeah, since the Jungle Boy match. Yeah.
Right. And so what this looks like to me now is that we're going to translate and we're going for a 4-way tag match, right? We're going to have House of Black versus, like, I can't envision anything less boring, like more boring, anything less interesting. Like, why? Why are any of these people feuding with each other? What do House of Black want? And how does Ricky Starks and Big Bill help them get the thing they want? Narrative incoherence, as I scream into the microphone. Like, what's the point of any of this? And I get it. Like, sometimes you just have a feud for a feud's sake, but this just seems like, well, all these are the guys that are willing to work Collision and willing to work Saturdays, so let's just put them in the ring together.
The problems with this is you do the whole thing of we're going to work our way back up, and now you're going, he's not going to give us a rematch. Like, you point us out. You don't mention the Bucks having them the title shot anytime, anywhere. So you scrap that. You think that And, that impacts other things as well. This is not just impacting the tag division.
No, it is not.
There are other things that will make more money for this company in the long term, way more money, that are being impacted by these decisions. Way more money. And, I tell you what I think would be, if you're going to run the four-way, run the four-way. But you put the belts back on FTR, what's the point? You're getting nothing out of that.
No.
Somebody needs to change character here. None of them are fresh anymore.
No.
The Bucks aren't fresh at current. Bucks aren't getting used, and they get no mic time and all that thing. That all kind of feeds into it. FTR definitely aren't. And you've got other things hanging over it. So I like the suggestion. Someone said this to me the other day, and I'm kind of keen on it. And it's very WWE in one way. But you want to turn them heel, but you're going to get a babyface pop if they win anything in like LA or in Rancho.
Yeah.
Cash it in. Make it like a Money in the Bank thing. Do it as a one-off, and then do the whole thing of, hey, this is our company. This is our company. We're going to do what we want. We're going to take this back. And you play on that. And you use Hangman just being a killer. Hangman doesn't need to turn. He can be a tweener. Just have him kill people. And Paige is a really interesting one going into this week. So we've just done this break-in angle.
Yep.
He didn't even reply to the week before with with Swerve costing him his loss to JY.
Yep.
That never happened. They did a promo on Rampage, and they just addressed the Ring of Honor belts.
Yep.
Which we'll get to in a second, actually. God, do I want to discuss them. But so he doesn't do that face thing of, you cost me. They let Swerve do that.
Again, the heels are driving the fucking narrative.
Yeah. So they do this thing with a house invasion. And you now have something set up for one. Hangman has to have vengeance to stay babyface now. Right?
Yes.
If he loses that next match to Swerve, then you have basically neutered him. You've chopped his bollocks off, let's be honest. Not for the first time we've had him, Paige. But that's what that happens is. So there's nothing left for him as a babyface then. So you either turn him or what? What do you do with it? So you have that match. Maybe they do something like Lights Out and that to keep Swerve's record. I think that's not beyond the possibility. It needs to be it has to be a gimmick match. You have to do a gimmick match. You put someone's family involved in that. But there's also, he needs that huge babyface promo. And this is something that they would have done, years ago. Something like this happens. Consequently, we do this huge babyface promo. And there are things, I'm going to be really careful what I say here, but there are things that he has never spoken about, that the themes have kind of been brought into this angle already. And I do wonder kind of I'm really, really interested in what the path is. But you need to do that. And if you don't do that, the angle's near enough dead. You cannot just do I just want him another match, or you just attack him or stuff. He has to cut that babyface promo. It's got to happen. And it's got to happen soon. You can't just leave it 3 weeks like they did when he came back after Moxley and then he cut the promo on, I can't remember my kid's name. You need to do it now.
I just don't, again, you have no other stories. Nothing else is happening, okay?
No.
Nothing else is happening. We covered it at the top. Nothing else is happening. Why are you not taking this and running with it? Everybody's
fresh.
Yeah, everybody loves Swerve. Swerve is hot as hell right now, okay?
Because he's fresh to that scene.
Yeah.
And yes, it probably shouldn't be Hangman that's elevating him.
Right.
But actually, it's a bloody good deal. I'm very English. It's a bloody good deal that he is, because he's working with Swerve.
Yes.
Right? And there is a lot of occasions, as of late, where we have people doing the supporting role to more experienced wrestlers, and even to some extent to, I had a conversation about the JY MJF thing, and it was like they were talking around each other or not working with each other, whereas it felt like Hangman and Swerve, they are working with each other, and you can see it. Everything is going between them, and I think it's now been noted, Will Washington's involved in that creative as well. But they are working to better, because, Paige is very much of the opinion that the more, it's a Jericho thing. The more people we elevate, the stronger the company is. So, yeah.
But like I said, this is what's making me insane about this right now. This is a hot program with two wrestlers who are clicking, who are absolutely killing it, right? You neutered their momentum to give wins to Christian Cage and Bryan Danielson. Okay? Fine.
You basically relegated it from a world title feud to a TNT feud, but
fine. Okay, we can recover from that because these are both two fucking talented guys who know what they're doing and can make you care, right?
Yes.
And people I was at Dynamite on Wednesday night. And I can tell you that people in the audience were extremely excited for this angle, right? Like there was a woman in front of me that was like, he needs to get out of his house. Oh my God, this baby now. Like seriously losing her shit over it in a way that I also was losing my shit over it. So, we couldn't hear a word Swerve said, but people were still terrified, right? Like, I just don't understand. It's my own personal frustration, right?
Yeah.
Hangman has grown and changed. Swerve has grown and changed, okay? The FTR are freaking static.
These are two of the only characters that grow and change independently.
Correct. No one, Orange Cassidy growing and changing a little bit, slowly, very slowly, very in character to go slowly. But stuff's happening. So why do we keep stopping the stuff that's happening to go back to focus on things where nothing happens? House of Black have not changed. Nothing changes. They don't even change other people anymore, which you could argue in the beginning, at least they were changing other people. They don't even do that. Okay. FTR, I am going to run the risk of allowing my personal dislike to affect my consensus criticism. But nothing happens with them. My daughter, my legacy, my daughter, my legacy. Great. Congratulations. Nothing has happened. Okay? Ricky Starks, they're not using me. Oh no, I'm not being used. Ricky, this was the 457th main event you've had this year. I don't know what you want me to do. You're being used. Congratulations, you're a tag team bout. I really like Big Bill, but he doesn't do a lot of talking. He's just big. Okay? So, we're going to take the programs that are actually interesting and sideline them in favor of a bunch of uninteresting guys, right? LFI, super awesome. They could be on the level of, Samoa Joe in terms of, just stone cold killers. I'd really like to see that. Let's see what happens with them. But, this is where, when I talk about the fact that they've moved away from this program, it's not because I like the Young Bucks and I don't like FTR. Okay? It's because, again, narrative incoherence. You told me a thing was going to happen, and now you're telling me that thing isn't going to happen. And I'm like, why? No one's dead. I see people on TV wrestling. No one's hurt. What the fuck is going on? And it's just, again, one of those things where I'm just like, this doesn't have to be this way. Why is this like this? Why is this like this, Trish?
You need that focus every week. If you don't have that focus every week on these key angles, and there needs to be, this was the Brian Alvarez argument from Friday that stirred everything up.
Oh, everybody got real mad about this.
He's right.
He's right.
It's and people don't want to admit it, but he's right. If that gets 10, 15 minutes every week, and we do in-ring promos, and we do matches, and we do this, or we spread it across both shows, why wasn't Hangman running out on Collision last night demanding, Swerve to do this or do that? Why are we waiting until next week? Why are we not running that angle back? Why are we not promoting this stuff? And they go, we didn't always do that. Well, they used to only have one episode a week. And every single one of these stories used to feature every single week. Yep. So you don't have that continuity. Even someone like Jon Moxley, he comes back last Saturday, not a big deal, just appears as a bit part player on Wednesday, is away. Obviously, he was over here in Europe on the weekend. So that return, did it mean anything? Not particularly. Yeah, he's going to go into the Orange Cassidy thing. But we didn't maximize that.
Nope.
So that's
I was thinking about this today. Haven't had a Moxley promo since before All Out.
Yep, promo.
Not a single fucking Moxley promo since before All Out. Why is this man not talking? He should be talking every week. They're
This is the thing, right? So if certain things that people enjoyed previously in AEW, that they say, there was loads of rubbish, there was this, but there were these killer personal promos because people were invested in their own story and the stories took time to develop and they were continuous. So you weren't playing catch up all the time. You weren't having all this pressure on one particular promo. You were able to build it, and these promos were getting time, and now the only time they get is MJF. Okay.
And this is where go ahead. Sorry, I'm interrupting.
No, and the thing with that is he is playing a very, I keep saying it, and people call him Hogan. He's much more like Cena, right? So he is seen as, leader of the brand now. He may be slightly paranoid about his position, but all top guys are, but yeah, he is more like Cena. But also, his the way of presenting the promo and the interaction with the crowd and his moveset, even though he can do far more in the ring, is much more like John Cena. So you're not going to get, as a babyface, as much those kind of killer personal promos that he was delivering sometimes as a heel.
Right.
Not going to exist. But we're not getting it for anywhere else. We get Eddie Kingston promos with incredible delivery hidden away on Collision, but the content is not always, the content's sometimes all over the place because what he's been asked to do is all over the place. Kingston, again, not on TV this week. They did the angle last week where he loses to Jeff Jarrett, and we'll just leave that one be for the Jay Lethal thing. Not on TV this week. Why? Why is there no follow-up? Why are we not doing anything with that?
We had 5 hours of television. You didn't have enough time on Dynamite. That's fine. Why the hell are you not doing it on Rampage or on friggin' Collision last night? Even a pre-tape. Do something.
Nothing.
No. And this is where I do feel a little bit of, this is where you'd have some empathy for MJF. Somebody needs to take the fucking pressure off the guy, right? Yeah. He cannot be the only person on the show with a storyline, right? Freaking figure out what you're pushing and push it and make that decision and stick to it, regardless of who bitches, who's unhappy, who wishes, who doesn't want to fucking lose. Put your goddamn shoulders on the mat and take a 3 count, okay? Narrative incoherence. Said it enough.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. They have to pick these lines and they need to stick them through and they need to build people up. If you look at the key periods in people's history, look at WWF in 1998. They didn't just have Stone Cold Steve Austin.
No, they did not. They did not.
They had Triple H. They had Mick Foley. And they benefited from the fact that you didn't have this stagnation at the top of the roster. We talked about it with WWE thing earlier. Their benefit was that they lost Hulk Hogan, they lost Bret Hart, they lost other people, like Luger, whoever, to WCW. You lose all them people. It's the same way you look at New Japan. So as much as you think it'd be a challenge that they lost, Prince Devitt, Finn Balor, they lost Nakamura and AJ Styles in 2016. That actually allowed people to progress upwards.
Yes.
It gave them then gaps to do that. And this is where AEW struggles, is because they have this huge top-heavy kind of part of their roster around the main event scene. Most of them established in previous decades. Chris Jericho, mainly seen as a 2000s wrestler, 98 2000 wrestler. Then you've got, even a guy like Christian, seen as 90s, 2000s. Then you have, John Moxley, not quite the same, but has been around a long time with AEW. Kenny Omega, time along with AEW. MJF has been in that spotlight now for 4 years.
Yep.
We're talking about freshness here. Then you've got Adam Copeland coming in and being treated bigger than anybody else on the roster, despite kind of only being really a kind of a mid-level draw in the top line in WWE. And Bryan Danielson, on every week, gets follow-up every week. Doesn't always react to wins and losses. That drives me crazy how people don't react to wins and losses anymore on these shows. But it's that thing of you have this top end that doesn't really move. It's stagnant. So you can move people up, but they have a ceiling. And because that roster is so solid there, it's really hard to move anybody else up. And then, sometimes they don't. They move them up and they don't always get behind them. We've seen the Hangman Page example, most prominent one. You move him up, you don't get behind him, and then you move him down and you decide he's, this level or that level. Well, you're going to have to start moving people up because this is where you are being bested by WWE. People talk about age. I keep reading about age. And
it's not the age. It's not the age.
And look, nostalgia is a big thing at the moment. You see it at concerts. If you look at your local concert hall or arena, you'll see reunions all over the place. Backstreet Boys, here we have like S Club, I think, in our arena and stuff like that. So there is a huge market in nostalgia, and they know it in 1834. But right. You have to balance that. You look at, it's kind of funny, the age of every program in wrestling other than NXT has got older in the last 4 years. So Raw has gone from 33 in 2019 and is now, creeping back towards 36. SmackDown has gone from 35, dropped to 34 in 2020, back up to 35. NXT is kind of interesting one. So it goes from 29 in 2016, 2018, and then up to 32 in 2021. And that's really interesting because 32 in 2021, that was the year where they were hot-shotting everything. Yeah. They were throwing everything at the wall to try and get AEW. They did the Keith Lee thing, the title wins. There was something every week. They were bringing people in from the main roster every week, but there was no real story to it. It was just one thing after another, nothing of importance. And if there's one thing that AEW should learn from, it's that period of NXT.
Yes.
You chucked all these people on there and it didn't work. TNA did the same thing. They did the main event Mafia, they did Sting, they did Hulk Hogan, Mick Foley. Didn't work. They sacrificed AJ Styles. He had to wait until he went to New Japan before he became a star. They sacrificed Samoa Joe, never recovered. Sacrificed James Storm. And what happens is, Dynamite's gone from 32 in 2020 to now over 34. So the thing is it works twofold. So it indicates, there's periods of where they're bringing in these more experienced guys, they're bringing in these people that are filling time. So you are seeing that. But there are ways to use nostalgia and that as well. And sometimes, before we talk about nostalgia, the age thing is not relative. So if you look at WWE now, they are getting older, but they have fresh people in their main events, right?
Yes.
So, and this is where they are besting them. Damian Priest, he's an old guy, late 30s, but never been in a main event scene before.
Right.
Rhea Ripley, biggest year of her career. Ratings mover. That group are hot. They have been presented that way over the years. Dominic Mysterio, same group, right?
Yep.
Which is insane. Nobody gets it. We don't understand it. Fine.
We don't have to understand it. It's just happening.
But that audience, he connects, right?
Yep.
Cody Rhodes goes in fresh. The biggest difference in business in these two companies, the biggest turning point, is Cody Rhodes going to WWE.
Yes.
Because it took that stale WWE product from 2019 to 2022 that was struggling and never felt fresh or never had that perception of people wanting to be there, and it changed it overnight. All of a sudden, their live tickets are, and they focus on him. But it was right because he was fresh, and he's not young. He's late 30s as well. He's one of the biggest stars in the company now. Sami Zayn was the same thing. He'd been there forever.
Yeah.
He'd been there a decade. But he was fresh to that main event scene. LA Knight, yes, he's a gimmick. Yes, he's one-dimensional. But you moved him all the way up. And you're moving him, and then once he loses to Roman Reigns, you do what you do with him. But you made that progression. He's fresh to that scene. Jey Uso, use him in that solo role. The crowd are obviously invested into him. Yep. Solo Sikoa, he's come out of nowhere. He's wrestling main events with John Cena. Gunther does his thing. Makes that thing of we have proper wrestling here. Takes another little kind of chink out the AEW armor. Yep. Logan Paul, huge kind of crossover appeal. Young, athletic. Annoys the hell out of me. But he's that thing. And then they combine that with keeping other people strong who are in their prime. Not their past prime, not people who've seen there. And you can bring Cena in, you can do that for a short period, but he's not kind of running that top scene 24/7. He's not having world title matches 24/7 or in your big feuds or having these other guys lose to him that are on the way up. But you have Seth Rollins doing his thing now with that, and they had to change his character to do that. But that's what you have to do. You made him fresh. Roman Reigns had to go heel. You made him fresh. He now has the stories. He's benefited from that. People can argue about Roman all day. Finn Balor goes in that Judgment Day group. He's stronger than he's been in 10 years. Becky Lynch, you put her on NXT. Look what that's done for her. And she's had probably the best in-ring year that she's had. So it's this combination. It's not about age. None of these people are young, most of them. There's a few that are. But most of these people aren't young, but they're fresh to that main event. And it's that stagnation in the main event. People want to talk about WCW, and I hate WCW comparisons. But the biggest thing outside of the creative, outside of Bischoff and Russo and that, was they ended up with a real stagnant main event that they ran, 1 year, these main events that drew huge amounts with the same people, and then the next year they didn't because people had seen it. And you just can't stay in that place. You need to always be developing something different. And that means getting them all the way to the very top. There can't be a ceiling because people have to believe that the time they've invested in people is worth it. That was a rant, wasn't it? There we go.
It was good. I was enthralled.
Yeah.
A lot of times what I think people are missing is that it's not a question of this old guy's coming in, right? And, there was a lot of discussion, and Dave on Wednesday after the ratings came out seemed to basically blame Rob Van Dam.
Oh my God.
It was so...
Look, they should have put Takeshita and Fletcher in that spot.
Yes,
that should have been that spot. There was no point in, you're using him for a live house. You're not using it for... He's not driving TV ratings.
No,
Come
he was there to get a pop from the film.
Yeah, so you should have flipped that, okay? But that is a combination of factors. They ran a no-hour break Q2 that was in the middle of NBA halftime, that then the Knicks and Celtics came back in, and they ran 2 ad breaks. 2 ad breaks, minimum 17% loss, on average. If you do better than that, then you've done well. So blaming it all on him was hilariously stupid.
It was funny but it did get me thinking, because one of the things you pointed out was that we went from Rob Van Dam to Sting to Ric Flair to Christian to Matt and Jeff Hardy to
and Jericho.
Edge to Jericho and Jericho teasing Big Show.
Yes. Right? Yeah.
And one of the things that, especially when it comes to Sting, right? People always say Sting has been used perfectly in AEW. That's been said since he came in 3-4 years ago, right? What does that mean? He's never had a singles match. He's been there to make Darby look good. The story has never been about Sting, right? The feuds are Darby's feuds. The stories are Darby's stories. The story is not about Sting. He's just there to show up and make Darby look good. His experience and his aura are maintained. He comes across as a big fucking deal, but he's also not beating young main event guys in singles matches, right? So that's, Christian was in a similar situation with Jungle Boy, right? Now, Christian's a little bit younger. He had singles matches. It was a little bit different. But he spent a year building Jungle Boy up and then had a feud with him where Jungle Boy finally beat him. Looked fantastic. It was good. But now it seems and I guess there's no way to do this. Sting's going to have his own story because he's retiring, right? You can't make Sting's retirement about Darby. I mean, you probably could, but and this is going to sound so mean-spirited, I don't think this group of people can do that right now. They can't find their butt with 2 hands on a flashlight. The wrestling equivalent is they can't promote a Kenny Omega MJF match with more than 8 days notice. So I don't trust them at this point to make a Sting retirement angle about Darby. They should, though. That's what it should be about, right? The Edge Christian storyline should be as much about Nick Wayne and Darby as it is about Edge, and it's not yet. Maybe it will be, but it's not, right? Rob Van Dam shows up, teams with Hook, leaves. I don't really care. Chris Jericho, I think you could argue, is still a big enough main eventer that having his own storylines, he's earned them, and he's not at the point yet where he can't have them, so I think we can take that out.
But he's at the center of the story. It's not Takeshita and Hobbs.
No.
Yeah, no. But that's common now. We don't tend to have younger guys leading stories as well.
No. And he's talking about bringing in Big Show, which No, don't do it, right? And people complain so much about the Hardys, but I would argue that the Hardys are not. I always find that kind of complaint to be a bit. Again, it seems sort of I don't like this guy, but they don't really do. There was a period of time where it looked like the Hardys were going to do something in AEW, and that was terrifying. But basically, since Jeff's arrest, they don't do anything. They are occasionally on Rampage. They seem to be doing what they can for Isaiah Cassidy. They lose every time they're on television, right? I am no longer concerned about a Hardys run, I guess would be the best way to describe it. But I also think you can't say that they're using every single person. And I'm also Dave seemed this week to be completely and totally convinced that Ziggler is coming in.
Yeah, probably.
I can kind of get it, right? If you've been a fan of Dolph Ziggler and you were geez, they didn't use him really well in WWE. He had so many opportunities and so many chances, and they didn't do anything for him, and it really sucked, and yada, yada, yada. You kind of, you want to go back. That's your nostalgia there, right? But I also feel they're doing this thing, and let's circle back so I can say it one more time, narrative incoherence, where we're no longer building storylines. We're sort of relying on older guys or more exposed guys for pops, right? To shortcut our way out of the story, the creative part of it, right? What is, Alvarez put this perfectly. What has Hook done in the 2 years since he's shown up? He's literally in the exact same position he was 2 years ago. And he's still very young, and I don't necessarily think they should rush that stuff. But at the same time, how does teaming with Rob Van Dam change Hook or make him different or better?
So here's the question, right? So they are using all these guys. None of them move any ratings for them. So that's the idea. So you use the nostalgia to boost your ratings ahead of your TV deal. Yep. To use that. But their audience doesn't always respond to that. Maybe short term, but it doesn't. So, here's the thing. You have devalued a lot of your TV ratings draws. You have people like Britt Baker, right? Britt Baker excellent TV ratings draw for Reign, still can draw a rating now. Doesn't get used in that capacity. You took her from being a star and you made her into just somebody else. Struggles now sometimes with reactions. We've talked about the Elite to death. Easy one. You've devalued all of them guys as TV. But these are people that your audience was invested in. That if they do something big, they will watch.
Yep.
So you should prioritize these people that have drawn you ratings during, the past 4 years. If you want to, drive a bigger rating each week going into your TV negotiations over these bringing people in for cheap nostalgia pops, because they only work so often, and you are aging up your program. We and then hiding everything else away on Rampage, it just has that perception of these people aren't important. All that's important are these people that have come out of here. But they're all 2 decades old. Yeah, I thought it was really jarring. I kept thinking about it as the episode was progressing. And you thought, okay, so, we've done the MJF stuff, which is, we're treating it like the bloodline. It's our full investment. Fine. You do that half an hour, do the Kenny angle with Jay, and then it literally is guy from 2000s, guy from 90s, guy from 2000s, continuously all the way into the main event, arguably, with, when you get to Danielson. And Okada is not getting any younger either. So, people still see him as fresh in AEW, I think, in a way that maybe don't do if they've been watching New Japan for such a long period. But yeah, you aren't going to progress like that. And I do not think that that's the best way that they can generate ratings. I don't think that's the best way they can drive them forward. You need to focus on these guys that can drive your money, but you also need to focus on bringing these young guys up. You have something in Swerve. You need to use it. You need to promote it. You need to focus on it. You need to put in with Hangman. You need to finish Hangman Page off.
Yep.
For God's sake, it's not that hard. He's easily Bryan Danielson. His in-ring year is actually kind of ridiculous in terms of no one paying any attention to it whatsoever. But he is now, okay, it's good, but he's now in a position where he is leading a program in terms of he's the senior in this one.
Yep.
But you have to make that a focus point every single week. Same with Darby Allin. Darby Allin's similar type of character. He should not be pushed to the back of this, Sting Christian thing. He's not a support player. This is where they used to do that. So the idea was always you match up Cody and MJF,
Yes.
a Darby with, you put him with Sting or you put him against Christian. They used to match up. So the idea was always you'd match kind of a veteran up and a younger guy, and it's to bring that person up to your level. But as soon as you start having kind of 2 veteran guys interact over there, you make that person unimportant, and then you're stilting them. So that's what you can't fall into the trick of, is these guys being important within each other. Copeland should be interacting with somebody who has never wrestled for WWE right now.
Yes.
And not just like talking to Darby or, talking like, what's he doing? You're talking with Sting. No, you need to be in something like that, something that surprises people, something that kind of is different, that takes you away from being that WWE persona, because that's all anybody sees right now. And yes, he should absolutely have kept the music, but it's that thing. It's the same with Punk with the white shirt and the same music, and that you've just taken this WWE wrestler and put him in AEW. Whereas Danielson and Moxley took great care to not be them guys. No. They changed the music up, they changed the look up in ways, they changed the personas straight away when they came in. And sometimes people take a long time to adjust, and obviously I feel sorry for him because he's never wrestled outside that company. It's going to take him longer than it would a Moxley or a Danielson.
It took Christian time. Christian didn't immediately jump into being the guy that we see today. He was floating around for a while with not a lot to do.
Yeah, and he's done this before. He went to TNA and reinvigorated his career in 2005-7. So he's a little bit more kind of thing of that. But yeah, you have to have that adjustment period, sure. But you are probably not going to get that unless you are working with this talent. And that would have been far more interesting and probably far more invigorating to this audience than what they're doing currently. So you need to get back to that in terms of that balance. The balance is off. That's what this all is. The balance is off. We don't have the supporting stories. We don't have the detail. Look at the belt angle. We do this belt angle and Max can't go get the belt back. Last year we did the belt angle with Adam Page and Adam Cole, and it lasts a week. Page gets the belt back and then he punishes the heel for stealing his belt, and getting in his face. That's it. 2 weeks. That's all it should be. Somebody send them DVD of that, please. Drive me crazy. But it's like, it's that simplicity of it, of that matchup. And these things that they used to do well, the balance is now off. And the danger is as they go more towards this TV deal, we get more of these old guys, especially because you're doing 2 retirement tours. You're doing the tour with Sting, but you're also doing this Danielson thing in the background.
Right.
So but you can't lose track of. You need to promote these younger guys up, because you also need to tell people that are looking at their contracts and they are looking at that yours is the best place to be.
But not just that, you need to tell the audience that it's okay when these 2 guys leave, because these other cool guys will still be hanging around. Like, you don't have to stop watching AEW when Sting's not here anymore, or when Bryan Danielson doesn't wrestle every week, because you have all of these other dudes that make the show really cool and awesome, right? Like,
you just got to give people a reason to invest in people. And that's the thing we talked about this. This is the thing that they restricted in the last few years. And that started with Hangman at Double or Nothing. Yeah. I think people underestimate the impact of that loss before all this other bullshit. I really do, because you told people that all that investment they made for 3.5 years really didn't matter. That's how it felt to a lot of people. And we still talk to people every day to say this, that it affected their perception and enjoyment of AEW pretty much like that. So that's the thing. You have got to teach people again that you can trust them and you can invest in these people. And putting a glass ceiling on them or having a big win and then get no follow-up, it's not going to do that. So, yeah, they've had a lot more focus since All Out. It's kind of weird that since Wrestle Dream, it's kind of slipped back a little bit.
It's so frustrating, because they were doing so well with, focus. We talked about this, our first week, focus storytelling towards a pay-per-view, focus storytelling towards a big episode. And now, out the window. Done. Narrative incoherence.
It's just like your new catchphrase. If mine's count the outbreaks, that's your new
narrative
catchphrase.
Incoherence.
I think there's just so much to it. And look, it's difficult. They're producing 5 hours of TV. I wouldn't wish that on anybody a week. But they've got to give people something else to get their teeth into. And they've got to be careful that the roles they are giving to other people aren't just gimmicks. I see people, people talk about the Tony Storm stuff. It's great. People like it. But it is a short-term gimmick. It's not a character.
Agreed.
It's not character work. It's a gimmick. Same with this Daniel Garcia thing, right? Another example of somebody that got a big one over Bryan Danielson. They didn't go anywhere. And now he does a dance, which is a gimmick. But his character needs to progress. He needs to progress.
Yes.
It's really difficult when you look at that roster 2 years ago and you think, who has gotten stronger in this company? And I'm left with Bryan Danielson, MJF, and then maybe Orange Cassidy. And then my list is very I don't know. Since 2 years ago, since, summer 2021, if that's what you're thinking of, before they had this onset of bringing everybody in to fill these slots at the top, it's very difficult to see anybody else that has progressed. And that's a problem.
Well, this is where that whole conversation that Dave had about WWE's viewpoint, what you talked about at the beginning of this episode in terms of WWE thinking they're going to get younger and they're going to cut a bunch of old guys and AEW is going to snap them up and that's going to be the end of it. And part of me is well, it's such an obvious plan. There's no way that Tony Khan would fall for it. And then the other part of me is there's no way that Tony Khan will fall for it, because I'm absolutely convinced that he will fall for it. And next thing you know, it's going to be freaking everybody and their brother from the upper mid-card of WWE, taking TV time away from the people that I actually cared watch, right? Mm-hmm. And at this point, I hate to say it, I don't have the confidence level that I did in 2021. I just don't. I'm not convinced that my faves are going to get airtime.
There's not that optimism. I know we discussed this elsewhere this week. There just isn't the optimism, and there won't be. Because they had this clear level of progression and this clear momentum of ways that people could just, grow and move through. And then that stopped because you had that stagnant main. So, and you had these people coming in left, right, and centre. And they did become over-reliant on that kind of the pop. And then they had the addition of adding Ring of Honor, which adds nothing. Absolutely nothing. You've got MJF doing pay-per-views when he should be main eventing and leading pay-per-views with tag belts. Pointless. Absolutely pointless. And working double thing and beating, the Guns and Jay in the same night is just, I don't want to start on that one, but that's pointless. It adds nothing to him at all.
No.
Walking around with that wonky belt, and then it takes him away from doing things with his actual belt where they can draw money. Go on.
No, they can't do another. The idea that they're doing this again in 0 Hour, like if the Guns don't beat him and beat him soundly to the point where he's in trouble in that main event and there's your peril, then we have a problem, right? Because realistically, you should have built a main event around a tag team actually defeating MJF and taking the tag belts from him. Because this, you and I talked about this, the match against the Righteous from as I said, gummy bears, it made me sick. Like, it was good and I enjoyed it at the time, but afterwards I was like, oh, I wish I didn't have that, right? Like, we're not doing this again. The tag division has been devalued enough. We
don't need two sets of belts for it that aren't doing anything and are just devaluing others. And it's the same with trios, The Bucks and Hangman, that's not their place to be running around with them belts. It just makes them look weaker. Hangman has to be the guy going out and doing solo stuff now.
What's the point? What's the point of them having the Ring of Honor's trios titles?
Nothing.
They're not working Ring of Honor. No. They're not working Saturdays. So, they're not doing matches with people. And every once in a while, we get a collision not a collision. We get a Dynamite where the Young Bucks and the Hangman defend against some random team, right? It's not any different than what the Acclaimed are doing, right?
No, but it's worthless. And all it actually does devalue Page in a way because you're telling people that's his level. ROH Trios Champion. His level should be your main eventer that replaces Bryan Danielson. Same guy, kind of connection with the crowd. Same ability to wrestle that often and deliver at that level, which people never give him credit for. But you go look at his record and it's so consistent. How many people have their best match with Adam Page? Quite a lot, actually, in that company.
Yeah.
Including Jon Moxley. So, who's wrestled everybody. So, yeah, you have to, them belts have to come off them guys. I get it. You want to raise subscriptions to Ring of Honor because nobody's watching Ring of Honor. I will be amazed. You're putting that pay-per-view on there and you're putting it on there as part of the subscription to raise them subscriptions and then hoping people don't cancel it. But none of them guys are going to be on it afterwards. There's no reason to keep it. But it's not, I think it's too much sacrifice for a product that just doesn't need to be there.
They'd be better served at this point by killing it and going back to Dark and Dark Elevation. And I know they're not going to because of the way that their media deal is set up with Warner Brothers and yada, yada, yada. But they got more value out of Dark and Dark Elevation and the ranking system in terms of narrative coherence than they do. You like how I did that? You like how I circle back around to that? Look at me, podcasting. But that's what it is. It muddies the water. It makes it look like it makes your belts. And it's taken me a long time to come to this. I fought this for a long time. I was like, no, they're wrong. You and I, know that I've not agreed with this. But it makes your belts look less prestigious because there's 700. Everybody has, as Jon Moxley said, everybody has a goddamn belt, right? Everybody who comes out of that tunnel has a fucking belt of some kind, right? Why? It's not helping you anymore. It's not helping. And I don't know.
The thing is, it's not like they're going to give the network any money on this as well. It's not going on Bleacher Report. So in terms of generating the network money, it makes no difference. I think the thing with that is that, Moxley being able to point that out on television is just, it kind of illustrates how much of a mockery it is. The thing is that, I keep saying the thing is, that's awful. But when the company started, they had some real simple things around their identity. They had minimal belts. They had different flavors of, wrestling from around the world, whether it be Lucha Libre, with a heavily pushed Lucha Brothers at the start, and ratings-wise, deservedly so. You had the Dragon Gate influence with SEMA, and then previous Dragon Gate, I know it wasn't wrestling them, but it's that sort of influence, and with the Bugs and that sort of thing. And then you had, the Japanese influence with the way that Kenny wrestles, with the way that Hangman wrestles, and the storytelling, and that developed. Then you had your WWE elements with your Jerichos, and then your kind of young, independent elements as well. And then even people coming in, Kingston came in late in age. Didn't make any difference because he was fresh.
Right. Right.
Yeah. But you had that mixture of styles, and that was key to them as well. So you had the minimal belts, so everything was important. You had that mixture of styles, and then you had this progression that you could see these young guys and you could see them develop, and you knew they were going to get somewhere, and you believed that the stories would always have focus and would always make sense.
Yes.
And now, Tony Khan can't answer that identity question for love or money. He goes, I have a great roster. Well, you don't use them. You know, you've got Adam Page wrestling 20 matches a year. Like, what are you doing? It's great saying I got a great roster, but you have to maximize their value and you have to use them.
I think, hopefully this is where I want a conversation about what's going on with AEW right now to come from. Not like MJF is Hogan, like it's all WWE. Like these are shortcut garbage criticisms that I'm like, no, it's or Rob Van Dam lost them 200,000 viewers. Like
I'm like, every time I read these rating summaries, even like Dave or something like that, I want to bash my head against the wall. I'm like, just please read the data. But the thing is, it's like, we have this discussion, and there might be people that go, oh, you're doom mongering and everything.
No!
And that's not what we're doing. We're discussing the things that frustrate us and lead to that kind of disconnect. Because we want to be invested in something. I am killing for having to have my teeth into something. To bite into something. Killing for it. That's all I want. I don't care about much else. It doesn't have to be with Max. I'm not into Max. But if there was something else for me to get my teeth into, Max wouldn't be so much of an issue.
No, you wouldn't be as frustrated because you'd have something else going on.
I wouldn't be noticing kangaroo kicks in blood matches or things like that. I just wouldn't. I wouldn't care so much. I just roll my eyes and move on like we used to.
Right.
When Jericho was doing something weird, or Cody was doing his weird promos. Or
these things have always existed in AEW. They have always had moments where they have not landed, or it has not worked, or it's been a little cringe, as the kids like to say. This is where I think, and Aaron Rodkowski put this together beautifully, because somebody was like, the golden age of AEW, and he showed all these match cards that were just like
dire
match cards, and he's 100% correct. And this is where that overblown criticism of it used to be this amazing sports-based presentation. Well, Brandon Cutler was out there with a dragon costume on and on Dynamite, so I'm not sure about the sports-based presentation. I think this is just a dream you had. That's the part where I'm just kind of like, no one expects this show to be perfect top to bottom every week, right? But there was more hits than misses, and more narrative coherence.
The important things the important things were important. Right. Everything made sense, and they had you. The things at the top had you invested.
Yes.
You can have anything on the undercard. You can have, look at WWE in 1998 or whatever, or WCW in 97. To be fair, WCW in 97 had all the cruiserweights, and that was great. But you can have whatever you want on the undercard. It doesn't really matter. What draws and what keeps people interest are the stories that are developed at the top.
Right. And the emotional relationships between the characters. Okay. Yeah. That's the stuff that I think they just, I don't know.
You want the characters to respond to each other. You want them to interact with each other. You also want them to respond to their wins and losses. I want to see them develop. This is where we've started this year, and there's very little character development. How many characters are developing? We spoke about it earlier, like 3 or 4. Everyone else is just, this is my one-dimensional character, this is what I do. I go out and wrestle. That is what people remember about 2020. They don't remember the rubbish matches. They don't remember stuff in the warehouse. They remember, do you remember that John Moxley, Chris Jericho thing? Do you remember that build-up when Adam Page got hugely over as a character into the stuff at Revolution? Do you remember when MJF turned on Cody Rhodes and then Cody tried to get back and got lashed and the pain? They don't remember this other stuff because there's no reason to, because the things that you were invested in are what you remember.
Right.
So you just got to give people investment.
Yeah. And they paid off.
Yes.
They paid off.
Yeah, that's it.
It's very simple, Trish. I mean, come on.
No, but I don't want it to people think, we're just talking everything down. No. These are the factors, and these are the things. And we've talked about some good things as well. We've talked about some progression. We've talked about things that are kind of on the cusp. They just need that one little promo or need that. And it'll be interesting as well. Bryan Danielson is out, and, people say he is legitimately out. Then you are going to have to put things on Collision. What are you putting on Collision to save that number, even though the next 3 weeks are going up against WWE competition via pay-per-view or via the Friday night against SmackDown?
Oh, God.
Yeah.
That Friday night SmackDown's
coming. That
Friday night Collision's coming up. We've been dreading it for weeks.
I ain't doing 9 minutes and minutes on that one.
No.
But
let's just go vibes only on that one.
Yeah, sure.
Vibes, no data, vibes only.
Sure. But you have that opportunity there to put somebody else in that spot to lead that. Or are you just going to put it on the shoulders of Christian and Copeland. You know?
Yeah.
What are you going to do with that? So these are the decisions going forward. There's opportunities there. And this is what we're looking at. So you've got these older guys. Are you going to bring other guys in to replace them as they go, or Danielson or Westing? Or are you going to elevate these other guys upwards? And that goes all the way to your world title program. I mean, it does worry me how kind of people think, look at Swerve, right? Swerve is in his first kind of, and all right, they've played around with the level of the program, but his first kind of true focus program. He makes note of the fact that he'd spoke in a promo for the first time for 6 minutes.
Yes.
And everybody wants to race him to the top, but it's more beneficial of him to have this kind of level of focus program every single week with people at a high level than it is to throw him straight up at MJF. And there's other things that would bar that, and I just don't see it happening. I'll put money on it not happening, to be honest. But it's much more beneficial for him to do that and have that progression, the same way that Hangman did, the same way that MJF did, than it is to rush him up and put him in that pressure position on a TV contract year to then have that everything on his back when you've never cut promos longer than 6 minutes.
The best thing that happened to Swerve was the stuff with Trench and whatever not working out, right? Because he had to go back to the drawing board. He had to say what worked about this and what didn't work about this. What am I keeping and what am I changing, right? He's, obviously, I've said this before, he cares very much about his presentation. He cares very much about his character. He does a phenomenal job with that. I would way rather give those guys time to think and grow, rather than you said, throw them in the main event scene and feed them to somebody.
And there's pressure on that because everybody wants that. They want people elevated straight away because they are looking for freshness. But if you give them prominent positions and prominent roles, then people won't notice it as much.
Right. And he is so close. So close. He's somebody that I am so excited about. I am so excited about him in AEW. I'm just he's somebody that I look forward to seeing every week. And so when I don't see him every week, I get wicked annoyed about it. But that's a topic we discussed today at length. So I think this is we've covered a lot of stuff here. Mm-hmm. We've ranted a little bit. Hopefully less aggressively than last week, but...
No, and it's been more of a kind of a mindset discussion, a philosophical discussion than it probably has been as much numbers-based this week. Which makes change, I guess. But yeah, so we definitely covered a lot of ground. I think that's a wrap on today.
I think that's a good place to stop.
It is. So this has been the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast. You can email us at trishandsarahpod@gmail.com. Have I got that right for a change? I never get
You
that.
have.
I have. Wonderful. You can find us on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. At Trish and Sarah, at Trish and Sarah. You can, put a review on our board thread, on the Wrestling Observer board. And anything else you can, you know where to find us by now. We also have a YouTube channel. You can look us up, Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast on YouTube. We'll be adding this episode with full subtitles for anyone that finds things easier at some point this week. Our producer is the wonderful Leah from Tunnel Talk. Listen to them every Sunday morning. And for now, we will see you in 2 weeks' time, just before Full Gear. So that's going to be an interesting point to start. I have been Trish.
I have been Sarah.
And we will see you in 2 weeks. Thank you for listening.